The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, a sterile contrast to the warm April light spilling through the high windows. Eleanor Grayson sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched white. She couldn't bring herself to look across the room where her ex-husband, Daniel Hargrove, lounged with that infuriating smirk tugging at his lips, the same smirk he'd worn the night he tossed her belongings onto the rain-soaked lawn of their sprawling estate and declared, "You're nothing without me." Today, in this supposed sanctuary of truth, he sat flanked by his attorney, a wiry man with a shark's grin, whispering conspiratorially as they flipped through a thick binder of what Daniel clearly believed was his trump card. Eleanor's pulse thudded in her ears, but her face remained a mask of calm skill she'd honed over years of swallowing her voice. The judge, a woman named Margaret Hensley with steel-gray hair and a gaze that could cut glass, called the room to order. Daniel's attorney rose with theatrical flair, adjusting his tie as he launched into a narrative painting Eleanor as a reckless spendthrift, a woman unhinged by her own emotions. "We have evidence of her financial mismanagement," he declared, sliding a stack of documents toward the bench. Bank statements, forged signatures, a tapestry of lies woven with meticulous care. Eleanor's chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that showing weakness only fed Daniel's hunger for control. When her name was called to testify, she stood, smoothing the skirt of her simple navy dress, a thrift store find that felt like armor in its understated defiance. The bailiff guided her to the stand, and she met Judge Hensley's impassive stare. "State your name for the record," the clerk prompted. "Eleanor Marie Grayson," she said, her voice soft but unwavering, a thread of steel beneath the velvet. Inside, she was a storm replaying the years of sacrifice, the slow erosion of her identity at Daniel's hands. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about clawing back the woman she'd been before he'd caged her spirit. Their story had begun 12 years earlier, at a charity gala in downtown Seattle. Eleanor, then a 28-year-old event planner with a knack for turning chaos into elegance, had been adjusting a floral centerpiece when Daniel approached. He was 35, a rising star at a private equity firm, exuding charm in a tailored suit that screamed money and ambition. "You've got a gift," he'd said, his hazel eyes locking onto hers. "This room feels alive because of you." She'd blushed, flattered by his attention, mistaking his intensity for admiration. They danced that night under twinkling lights, and by the end of the evening, he'd slipped his card into her hand with a promise to call. He did relentlessly. Flowers arrived at her cramped apartment the next day, followed by dinner in VY Tatians to restaurants she'd only read about in magazines. Daniel was a whirlwind of charisma, sweeping her into a world of weekend getaways to the coast and whispered promises of a shared future. "You're meant for more than this," he'd say, gesturing at her modest life. "Let me give you everything." She'd believed him, dazzled by his voisin of their life together, a voisin that felt like love until it hardened into possession. Their wedding was a quiet affair, held in a rose garden overlooking Puget Sound. Eleanor's mother, Clara, had gripped her arm as they stood in the shade of a willow tree moments before the ceremony. "Are you sure, Ellie?" she'd asked, her voice trembling with unspoken worry. Eleanor had smiled, brushing it off as nerves. "He loves me, Mom. I've never been surer." But even then the cracks were forming, subtle, insidious. Daniel had insisted she quit her job months before the wedding, framing it as a gift. "You shouldn't have to grind away when I can take care of us," he'd said, his tone warm but edged with something unyielding. She'd agreed, thinking it temporary, trusting the man she'd vowed to stand beside. The first year was a honeymoon blur, trips to Paris, late-night talks over wine, laughter that filled their sleek new home in Laurelhurst. But slowly the air shifted. Daniel's attentiveness morphed into oversight. He'd question her spending, her phone calls, her friends. "I just want to protect you," he'd say when she pushed back, his voice smooth as silk but heavy with expectation. She stopped arguing, shrinking into the role he'd carved for her. The perfect wife, silent and decorative. The real fracture came 3 years in, over a dinner of roasted chicken she'd spent hours preparing. He'd been late, as usual, breezing in with a distracted air. She'd asked about his day, hoping to bridge the growing silence between them. Instead, he'd leaned back, fork in hand, and said, "Do you honestly think you're adding anything to this marriage? I'm out there building an empire while you what?" Cook. The words landed like a slap, casual but venomous. She stared at him, the room spinning, but he didn't even glance up, chewing as if he hadn't just sliced her open. That night, she lay awake beside him, his steady breathing mocking her sleepless ache, and realized she was disappearing. The descent was gradual but relentless. Daniel controlled the finances, insisting all accounts be in his name. "It's simpler this way," he'd say, while vying off her questions. Her world shrank to the walls of their homey, a gilded prison with marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered no escape. He'd mock her attempts to reclaim her independence, her suggestion of a part-time job met with a scoff. "Why bother? You just embarrass yourself." Her tears were overreactions, her protests ingratitude. To the outside world, they were a golden couple, Daniel, the brilliant financier, and Eleanor, his poised, quiet shadow. But behind closed doors she was a ghost, haunting a life she no longer recognized. The turning point came on a rainy October morning 5 years into their marriage. She'd slipped out for a walk, a rare act of defiance, her boots splashing through puddles as she wandered their neighborhood. The gray sky mirrored her mood, but the solitude was a balm. She called her older sister Rachel from a park bench, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I don't know who I am anymore." Rachel, a no-nonsense nurse with a fierce streak, didn't hesitate. "Then find out, Ellie. You're not his puppet." Those words lodged in her chest, a seed of rebellion sprouting in the dark. She started small secret meetings with a therapist named Dr. Lila Carter, who worked with women escaping toxic relationships. Lila's office was a cluttered haven of books and plants, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of Eleanor's home. "He's not just controlling your life," Lila said one afternoon, peering over her glasses. "He's rewriting your reality." She handed Eleanor a notebook. "Start tracking everything, every word, every move. It's your anchor." Eleanor took it, her hands trembling, and began documenting the gaslighting, the insults, the financial chokehold. She opened a hidden SAVYNGS account, funneling tiny sums from grocery cashback into it, and took freelance editing jobs under Rachel's name, building a lifeline in the shadows. When she told Daniel she wanted a divorce, he laughed, a deep, guttural sound that chilled her. "You think you'll walk away with anything? I'll leave you with less than nothing." His calm was more terrifying than his anger, a promise wrapped in ice. But then came the bait and switch. For weeks, he turned saccharine, cooking her favorite meals, suggesting a weekend at their cabin in the Cascades. "Let's reset," he'd said, his eyes soft with feigned remorse. She wavered, hope flickering, until she found the papers in his briefcase. Offshore accounts, asset transfers, her signature forged on a dozen documents. He'd tricked her into signing travel forms before their trip, claiming they were routine. The betrayal ignited a fury she hadn't known she possessed. From then on, it was war, quiet, calculated, hers. She played the compliant wife while gathering evidence. Photos of papers, recordings of his rants, a copy of the fake contract snatched from his desk. She moved like a phantom through their home, her fear replaced by purpose. Daniel, oblivious, installed safes and met with a man he called James from compliance, a shifty accountant with a perpetual sheen of sweat. She knew James was no compliance officer. He was the architect of Daniel's financial shell game. The night she declared her intent to divorce a second time, he shrugged. "Go ahead. You'll regret it." 2 weeks later, she came home to changed locks and a typed note. "This property is now solely mine. Entry is trespassing." Her clothes, her journals, her mother's antique locked, all trapped inside. Humiliation burned as neighbors gawked, but she drove away, landing in a dingy motel off I-5, its neon sign buzzing like a taunt. There, she discovered the joint accounts emptied, her credit cards canceled, her car repossessed, all orchestrated moves in Daniel's chess game. She had $200 in cash and a battered laptop, but no surrender. Her lawyer, Nadia Patel, was a 34-year-old firebrand with sharp cheekbones and sharper wits. She'd seen cases like this before, men who wielded wealth like a weapon, and took Eleanor's case pro bono. "He's not just a bully," Nadia said, scanning the evidence Eleanor had compiled. "He's a criminal. Fraud, forgery, coercion, not settling. We're burying him." They dug in, subpoenaing bank records, hiring a forensic analyst named Tom Vega to dissect the digital signatures. Tom, a lanky ex-hacker with a dry sense of humor, uncovered the first bombshell. The travel insurance PDF had been edited post-trip, Eleanor's signature lifted from an old lease. Then came the email-forwarded chain from James to Daniel, buried in an inbox archive. She'll never suspect the offshore move. Timing's perfect. Nadia's eyes gleamed. This is gold. Next, Tom cracked the metadata on Daniel's court-submitted docs, proving tampering. The tide was turning, but James stonewalled them, citing confidentiality until Nadia secured a subpoena. Meanwhile, Eleanor found a key in an old Persia relic from a lockbox Daniel had forgotten. With a court order for access, she slipped into the house, now a sterile shrine to his new girlfriend, Olivia, a leggy brunette with a predatory smile. The lockbox held a USB drive labeled 2013, their wedding year. It contained chats between Daniel and James, plotting asset concealment before she'd even whispered divorce. The stakes escalated when a gravelly voice called her motel phone late one night. Drop this or you'll wish you had. Cash can still fix it. Her heart raced, but she recorded it, sending it to Nadia. Blackmail, Nadia said, grinning. He's desperate. They filed it with the court, and Judge Hensley's demeanor shifted, her skepticism replaced by scrutiny. James cracked under deposition, admitting, Daniel said she'd never fight. I didn't sign up for this. His testimony, paired with the USB, painted a damning picture. In court, Daniel's facade crumbled. He took the stand, sweating through his suit, claiming, I only wanted to protect my future. Nadia eviscerated him, her questions like knives. By forging her name? Threatening her life. He snapped, yelling. She was going to ruin me. The room stilled, his mask shattered. The judge's verdict was swift. Eleanor regained the estate, plus damages, and Daniel faced criminal review. His empire unraveled, contracts cancelled. Olivia gone. His name synonymous with disgrace. Eleanor moved into a cozy apartment near Lake Washington, its windows framing a world she'd reclaimed. She volunteered at a women's shelter, her voice steady as she told others, You're not in VY Cybele. One evening she saw Daniel across the street, older, diminished. Their eyes met, a silent coda, and he walked away. She didn't need his remorse, she had her truth. On a crisp fall day, speaking at a seminar, she said, They tried to bury me, but I grew roots. The applause was thunderous, and in it, she heard her VY Torah not just over him, but over the silence she'd once called home.